I'm here today with Lisa Salamone. I hope I said that correctly.
Yeah.
Um, she is the mother of a child who is a female to male, trans identified, and she's just going to tell her story. This is one of those heartbreaking stories of a mother who watches her child go down a path that is just heartbreaking. So, Lisa, why don't you go ahead and just tell us your story?
Yeah. Well, my daughter, a little bit about her, is very gifted, is considered was considered twice exceptional. So
Mm.
she had this, upper echelon of intelligence, but yet she had some working memory and processing issues. We found this out later. um, but always been very creative, very artistic, very, very early on, and was recognized for these abilities early on. And then when she was about 12, um, I started noticing a change in her, this anxiety. And she and I were always very, very close. But I did start noticing this anxiety, and I don't recall how it came to be, but she had she was a voracious reader, and she went online to read, to look for some more books. And back then I didn't have any parental, controls on. I limited her time to 30 minutes a day. Thought I was on top of it. She ended up reading this book. I want to say it sounded like it was 50 Shades of Grey sort of thing, well before that came out. And it was very sexual, it was very violent. I and I If my memory serves me right, I think it was almost like a snuff book.
And she was 12?
She was 12 reading this, only child, very inquisitive, very naive, just sweet, just very, very sweet. She didn't tell me this. Finally, I got it out of her, and she'd been struggling with this for a year. She felt she did something wrong, and she didn't. I said, honey, you have done nothing wrong.
So did the
You know,
content
you,
of the book freak her out? Was that where
it
the
did.
anxiety was coming from?
It did. It did. Because I was always very open with her about sexuality and different kinds of love, whether it's gay love, bisexual love. I was always very, very open with her very early on. And that it was a compassionate thing. And
Mutual and
yes, exactly, exactly. And I remember her, teaching her at the time, things like where babies came from, and she would come back from school and say, "Oh, so and so still thinks a baby comes from the belly." And I said, "Well, you know the truth." And she was always very excited, always into examining her body, wanting it to change and be female.
interesting. Oh,
Yes,
so she actually anticipated that, looking forward to it.
she did. She did.
Wow.
She studied everything.
So she
She
knew what to
studied
expect.
She knew what to expect. She couldn't wait to get there. If the doctor said, "You're only in stage this," she's like, "I think he's wrong. I'm in stage 3 or whatever as far as
Wow.
sexual development." So, yeah, she was really looking forward to it. So this generalized anxiety, because of it, I took her to a therapist because she had this fear or aversion to technology now. She didn't want to be on her iPod. It was bad.
It had traumatized her, it sounds
It
like.
had really traumatized her.
Wow.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
So how did you
yeah.
pick the therapist to take her to?
Well, I got a few names from her pediatrician. I looked up different people. I talked to different people, and I found this one person that I thought would be a good match. I've had therapy in the past myself and whatever, and thought this could be a good thing. It was good for me. And it did get rid of her fear of technology, but in all the time she was with that particular therapist, I saw her getting worse and worse. I saw her being not only diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, then it was ADHD, then it was OCD, just a whole slew of things. And I did feel that the therapist, psychologist, was, I felt like a gap was being placed between my daughter and myself.
Yeah, because it sounds like you had been really close.
We were extremely close, yeah. And that, mother is just, if I would when my daughter would get comfortable with technology, and of course, like all the kids, vroom, that opened up the floodgates and she wasn't fearful anymore. And I would punish her to maybe if she did something and you do what their currency is, and I'd take away her phone. And she'd call her therapist, and her therapist would say how archaic I was to my
Oh,
daughter. And my daughter said, "She wants to talk to you," meaning the therapist wants to talk to me. So I got on the phone. That was the end. That was the end. I said, "I know what you said. You're not her mother. I'm her mother. And that is not useful, nor is it helpful."
and you're just one in many parents that I've talked to who've either had school officials or therapists undermine their parental authority and their relationship with their child. And it's
Right.
confounding to me why a therapist would do that, because that parent child relationship is so important, especially at that young an age. I mean, it wasn't like she was 18, she was, 12 or 13. Um,
Yeah.
and so to me, it really, it kind of is a good warning sign for parents if they have concerns about their child, to be really careful about the therapist you take your child to, because it can really undermine your relationship.
It's so true because at that point, she was now about 14, heading into high school. And that's when the rumblings of my friend thinks, well, there was a lot of there was a lot of talking about her friends. And she would say they this, they that. And I'm thinking it's a group of her friends.
Right.
And it wasn't, as we all know, it was one person who was using new pronouns, toying with the idea of non-binary and pronoun changing and name changing, all of that.
Wow.
And I remember she was still with this therapist, and and there was talk. Sometimes I would go in with my daughter. A few times we would go in together. It was mostly her alone, but there was talk from the therapist of, well, gender is very fluid and all of this, and each generation, is it there are those that come to the forefront, whether it was, gay people from a previous generation pushing those ideals.
And if you were anything like me, you were probably pretty oblivious to what was actually going on in the background. I think there were a lot of us
I was, yeah,
who are very supportive of human rights, human dignity, who want to support people, who had no idea sort of um, all the undercurrent that goes along with this. And once a child gets pulled into it, it's almost like they're gone.
right, right. And so I found that to be um, not aligning with how I thought, but I was always open to different ways of thinking. It wasn't that. I searched for another therapist that specialized in DBT, dialectal behavioral therapy, that this could be something that would be helpful to her. And I think my daughter may have even brought it up to me. And I did find somebody that ran a DBT clinic in Tennessee and had moved here. And my first interview with her was, this is how, what my daughter is going through. And I felt like the last therapist, was placing a wedge between my daughter and myself. And I remember that first day, and this therapist, who I do admire to this day, and she said, I just think all of this is a phase. And I thought, oh, thank God, just like somebody's rational here. But as therapy continued, um, I occasionally would come back in, and this therapist was she was good. We walked out from therapy feeling better. However, as my daughter got more and more into this ideology, I had concerns of, I was doing research and finding that historically transsexualism was like 0.03% of the population. And I was like, isn't that interesting? Not only is my daughter identifying, but so are all her friends. And not only that, there's a whole cluster of them in her high school. Like, it's not
Yeah.
0.03% of the population. And then I was hearing stories from different various areas. And
Did she start talking to you about wanting to go on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones?
no puberty blockers. It was, she didn't talk about cross-sex hormones really until college. Um, she had been seen by other psychologists. This psychologist, her current therapist, actually got a full-time job at her college, and I thought, that's fantastic. It's a good transition. And I think this therapist with my daughter, I think maybe had her hands full with my daughter. She was sort of the exception to the clientele she had ever seen before. My daughter is like a little lawyer, a little attorney, and she'll argue on everything. And she got her a different therapist. And I had said initially, I talked to her and I said, look, this is a phenomena. This is what's happening. I'm not comfortable with it. And I would send her information on it. And she's like, thank you for your input and all of that. But you may want to find somebody that the two of you can go to that validate your daughter's, which I heard just as affirming. And I said, I can't do that. So my daughter found one in her college that was a gender specialist, which of course we know there's no such designation. Immediately, I said, if you're going to see this person, please bring your mental health records. She's been diagnosed with borderline, or she was almost diagnosed with borderline personality. She was too young. And the psychologist said, if you were over 18, you'd probably be diagnosed with this. But if you can get a handle on it, you might never be diagnosed with it. And he said, all of us have some sort of mental illness. But she was diagnosed with bipolar. And she's been on a ton of medication and taking medication just to cope. Some stuff I don't like her on. She brought the information to this new therapist who I had looked up ahead of time, was very young, had just got her PhD, was about 27, looked on her Facebook page, and I could see already this was somebody that was going to be affirming. And she did. She told my daughter, you have gender dysphoria. And said she didn't need to see the mental history report. There was no need. My daughter, did say, I have this. She's like, I don't need to see it. And told her she could march right down to Planned Parenthood and have this done.
Wow.
Yeah,
And that's so tough at that age because once they're in college, you really don't have um, authority. You don't have access to their
no.
healthcare records. You really just have to sit back and watch it unfold. So, did she go to Planned Parenthood and get the testosterone?
She didn't right away. She didn't right away. She had met a boyfriend at school, a boy. She'd always been attracted to boys. This boy considered himself gay or bisexual, and so she went on this social thing, Grinder, and found him. He happened to be a year older than her. And as soon as she met him, she was really pushing this again. And this
Because she could
is,
be his boyfriend.
yeah. And I think he had had some bad experiences with other males, maybe abusive. And here was this gentle who thought she was a boy. So when she met him, she was really pushing it. And I said, your job is get through, get through college. Your job is to get an education. It's not to question your gender. And let's revisit this when your brain has matured and all of that. Yeah, she's post-adolescence, impulsive. So she did put it off for a while, about a year and a half. And it wasn't until this past December where I had found out through my insurance company when I got the EOB, I saw this. And so I called my ex. Now, of course, we'd been divorced too, right around the time my daughter was 14. And so there's a lot of factors there. So I called my ex. I said, "Are you aware of this?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, and I had been sending him information, which he never had time to read. It was very hard to have a co-parenting relationship with him. It was very, very difficult. His animosity toward me, he's couldn't really get over himself. And I said, I've sent you things. This is so dangerous. And he said, it's her mistake to make,
Ooh.
which I heard somebody else say that you
Yeah,
interviewed.
I believe
I think it
that
was
that
Rob.
was,
I think it was Rob.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep, I
Yeah.
believe it was Rob Hoagland.
Yeah.
So,
And
so this idea
I
that
never,
we're just going to go ahead and let them move forward, and if it's a mistake, they're grown-ups, they have to own it.
right. And that was the first time ever I'd sworn at him. I just was. And he
So
said,
did
okay, okay. He said, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for it. And I said, I won't pay for this. And if it will not be on my insurance, then you're in for a rude awakening for how expensive this will be. And then he said, well, tell her I can't afford it. And I'm like, you tell her. You know?
Oh,
So
wow. And
that was
this is
how
another thing
that went.
that's so infuriating is that these parents' insurance will pay for puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and in some
Right,
cases surgeries, and the
right.
parents are helpless to stop it. I actually heard of one parent who was desperately trying to get their insurance company to drop their daughter because she was about to have a double mastectomy, and the insurance company wouldn't drop her because it wasn't, at the right time period for dropping. And this mother couldn't do anything about it. Her insurance paid for her daughter's breast to be amputated, and there was nothing she could
Uh,
do about it. And that's just got to
uh.
be so helpless.
It really is. I had texted my daughter and I said, I got this bill. What was this for? This service in December. And she said, oh, it was for testing, whatever. If you're going to yell at me, don't call. And I'm not a yeller and a screamer, and I FaceTimed her. That was January 6th, 2020. And she was there with her boyfriend. And I said, honey, um, I'm just concerned for your health. You know, I really wish you had waited. But it was a very heated discussion. Everything I said, I was transphobic, homophobic. And I said, honey, you know that's not me. You know that's not me because I've raised you otherwise. And the boyfriend chimed in and started saying some things toward me. And there's a lot in their relationship as far as social justice. My daughter wasn't really into this until she met him. Um, a lot of Antifa stuff and
So
all
she's
of
really
that.
been indoctrinated into a
Oh
very
yeah,
different worldview
yeah,
than how you raised her.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and it's very hard to talk to someone like that because
yeah.
anything you say that doesn't validate their belief system is transphobic, homophobic,
Right,
bigoted, racist,
right,
Naziist. I mean, it's just
right.
it puts you in a position where you either have to just go along with it completely or they label you as a hateful person.
Yeah, you can't get you can't get a word in edgewise. You're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, if you say anything. I've seen my daughter go from deep thinking, open thinking to a very narrow worldview, um, in general.
And
Uh,
it's confusing to me that anybody would diagnose her with gender dysphoria based on her history. I mean, to
right?
me that's just shocking. I mean, there are
Yeah,
cases, where a child clearly has some issues, but it sounds like your daughter had no issues up until she
none,
started to
none.
hang around with other girls. So this is sort of classic rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Yeah, she was, I remember her saying she felt that at the age of 5, she knew she thought differently than other kids because she's so intelligent, such, I say it over and over, such a deep thinker that she would say to me and even her kids sometimes or her friends sometimes, you know how this and all that happens and you're just kind of like, no, because you haven't thought about it. Just really some mind-blowing stuff, just awesome stuff. So there was that not fitting in a little bit. There was a little bit of bullying for her jealousy of her creativity and her artwork and the praise she got for it. There was sexual abuse, I found out later. I At one point I thought she was had some high level functioning autism as well. And the psychologist at the time who tested her said, I can understand where you would think that. Because she had her fixations, she had her things that she was really into. And I see this as another thing she's really into. This is the current thing. Just the whole thing when you look into the numbers and you know that there's just this 4,000% explosive incidence within the last decade of this current, what I call aggressive transgender ideology. Overwhelmingly, 85% or whatever are these. Now it can be it can be adolescent, it can be post adolescent girls. Something's wrong.
Something's wrong. And when you talk about your daughter, I think about how hard it is for girls who are quirky and who are smart. And if she decided that instead of a girl, she was a boy, then suddenly those attributes wouldn't be as difficult for others around her to handle, um, which is a horrible
Yeah,
thing to say, but it's true
yeah,
that being a smart girl can be really tough.
yeah. Yeah.
And this is again where I see this happening to, it seems like the very kids, the very girls that we want to grow up and be role models for other girls of being smart and competent and engaged, strong women, are the ones who are falling prey to this because they're so uncomfortable being that kind of a woman.
Yeah, my family always looked at her like a leader, that she would be this leader someday. She was the girl with the little red cowboy boots. She was into fashion, and she'd just dress up in what you would imagine a free spirit, artistic, creative child would be. And she, even in middle school, sent around a petition, started a petition about girls being allowed to wear leggings in yoga class, like a mixed group, boys and girls, um, because they were thinking of changing the policy, that it was too stimulating for the boys to have the girls in leggings. And she won. She won. They said, okay, you guys can. I mean, this child has never, ever, I didn't go, oh my gosh, this makes total sense. Oh yeah, this, and this. Never.
Never.
Before she broke off from me, she said, asked, do you think I'm transgender? And I said, honey, from what I'm learning, 99% of me says no. If you were to come to me at age 30 with cognitively, you know, a brain that was cognitively, I don't want to say set, but matured, 100%, 100%, and you were happy and you were coming from a place of not FOMO, fear of missing out, urgency, something's wrong with me. And she's so sweet. And she said, very upset, um, I really don't want anything bad to happen to you. I don't want you to die, but I might not be able to do this until you die. And I thought, I didn't say anything. I thought, I'd be okay with that. I'd be okay with that.
That's such a interesting thing for her to
Yeah.
say. So she
Yeah.
has started testosterone. Have you seen her since she
I
started?
didn't see I didn't see her since that FaceTime call in January. She was upset, and I was upset too, but there we respect one another and don't yell. And she just said, I'm hanging up, like warning me, and hung up. And there were a few texts back and forth, and the boyfriend said, stop doing this, texting me, you're going to lose her forever, blah, 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 blah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I just said, honey, you know, I love you. And if this saves you from regret down the line, it will have been worth it. And I got a really, really nasty text back from her, which is not my daughter. Now, I have a background history and personal training. And so I've been around a lot of bodybuilders, people like that who have taken hormones, testosterone, all that stuff. And I know about the honeymoon period. I know about the becoming churlish and aggressive, and that's what's happening. I
Yeah,
know it's
especially if
happening.
she's started the testosterone, it's tinkering with her system. It's going to make
Yeah,
her more aggressive. It's going to change her personality.
yeah. And I see that in the text. So she will text me about school, are you safe? She lives with her dad now. She was living with me exclusively for a very long time. But are you safe? Are you staying safe? How's school going? She'll answer those things, but will not acknowledge me at all, whether it's Mother's Day, my birthday, nothing. And I keep that connection with her. But I'm no longer a personal trainer. About a year ago, I've decided to become a life coach. And I think you had another life coach on. I think I think what helps get me through now is the questions I've learned to ask myself. Because there's a lot of, I see a lot of parents like me guilting themselves, um, thinking they did something wrong.
Well, and your situation is so similar to other parents that I've talked to where
Totally. Yeah.
you felt like there was something kind of not quite right with your daughter. You got her help, and in the long run, the help that you got her ended up backfiring
Right.
and really harming your relationship and harming your daughter. And I see this increasingly happen. And one of my big concerns is that in so many states now, therapists are required to affirm a child's gender identity. And so it's going
Right.
to be harder and harder for parents to find even those very few therapists who are out there who will do something other than affirm, who might, help, look for those underlying causes of that identity issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't have the questioning tools that I do now, I think, as a parent. Why are you thinking this way? What are you making it mean about you? We're not taught any of this. We're taught to seek validation outside of us, whether it's a good grade in school and anything to feel better about ourselves.
Well, and if
And
she didn't have a lot of friends, her embracing this gender identity suddenly opens up this whole support group for her.
oh,
People who are
yeah,
going to affirm and validate her, give her affection and approval,
exactly.
and just for a kid who's not had that, it's got to be a pretty amazing experience. So having it might feel very right because all of a sudden you're loved and you're told you're okay and it must
Right.
feel so good. I mean, I can understand how these kids
Absolutely.
get pulled into it, especially these girls who are quirky and who aren't fitting in real well.
Yeah. And they're they're the underdogs and they're rooting for the underdogs. So you have these girls that are very vulnerable and maybe just learning about social justice or whatever. And she was, through some of the things she did, maybe like a little feminist, maybe, and sticking up for those rights. And then she's introduced to somebody that says, or a group that says, well, if you're doing that, we're oppressed too. And we have our rights. And she's very empathetic. She considers herself an empath, taking on other people's feelings. For a long time, she wanted to be a plastic surgeon that did the surgeries for these people. It's a matter of having compassion and empathy and then slowly identifying as that other person, community, or being part of that community, if I'm making any sense.
Yeah,
If
well,
that
especially with the narrative that they give you. I mean, if she was
Right.
able to go into a therapist's office and be diagnosed with gender dysphoria on the first visit without even being, having any of her previous medical history looked at, it's no wonder she fell into it. I
Yeah.
mean, so your husband, she lives with your husband. Is he affirming?
He is affirming. Uh, yeah, I mean, I don't know too much what's going on because I don't
Yeah.
hear from either one of them. Uh, I think I last asked her how her grades were, how'd she do with this whole online thing, and she said fine, and that was congratulations. It's very cut and dry with her, very cut and dry with him. So I know he is affirming her, and I even reached out to his family, when I first found out, and they just they they have some issues with him. He's sort of removed himself a little bit even from his side of the family. I know they feel this is wrong, but and probably tried to talk to him. I don't know. Um, I I really don't know. I don't know.
Well, it's I think that, on the positive note, that your daughter at least is maintaining some degree of connection with you. I think that a lot of parents, they get completely cut off because the whole narrative is
Right,
that if your parents don't affirm you, they are not loving, they are not, they are
right.
hateful people. So the fact, I mean, I think that probably gives credit to the how strong your bond was when she was growing up. And I really have a lot of hope that she'll get through this because she is a bright kid. And
Yeah,
I think we're hitting a point where people are starting to say, whoa, what are we doing? What is going
right,
on?
right,
And why is it that we're telling people that if they have, these, identify a little bit differently than other people, that they should harm their bodies, that they should,
right.
take testosterone, take cross-sex hormones, get surgeries, do things that damage their bodies, these healthy bodies. And I think that we're starting to get to the point where people are kind of questioning that because we're hearing horror stories about, I just actually watched a video from a woman who transitioned to a man. He has outrageously high medical bills. Um,
Mm,
and the phallus that was made has caused tremendous
mm.
problems.
I've
uh,
heard that before.
yeah,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
horrible side effects. And I've heard the same thing with men who get vaginoplasty, that they are, these are not, delightful surgeries that make
No,
everything better. They're
no.
horribly invasive surgeries that cause lifelong problems.
That it does, and, that's some of the stuff that I discussed with my daughter as well. I said, you're not even 20." This was when she was 18 at the time. I said, "You're not even 20, and you're making a decision. If you live to 100" excuse me, I have lung issues. If you live to 100, you're making a decision now. You're not even 20 for the next 80 years of your life. Do you really see yourself as an old man? Of course not. Her prefrontal cortex is just not fully matured. It's not, they don't have
Well,
that.
and not to mention that inducing menopause when you're in your early
Ugh,
20s has,
yeah,
I mean, that's going to cause lifelong problems, osteoporosis, higher risk
right.
of breast cancer. I mean, those are just the things that will result from an early menopause. And then you add the testosterone on top of that. I mean,
Heart disease, all of, right,
yeah.
right,
Yeah, it's
right.
it's gotta be like I kind of feel like as a parent, you are in a very similar situation to a child, to a parent of a child who has a drug addiction, and they can see that child harming themselves, harming their bodies, making these choices that are not healthy, and there's not a lot you can do about it.
It's so interesting. I had a conversation with my accountant, and one of the questions is, he said, because I was declaring my daughter on health insurance, and he said, "Does she have a job? Do you know if she's working?" And I said, "To be honest with you, I don't." And I told him why, and just a little snippet. And he said, "I know I'm your accountant, but the worst thing you can do is not support your child." And I said, "I appreciate that. However, I've always supported my child. I do not support, just like a drug addiction, I will not support her testosterone drug addiction. I won't." And that's exactly how I see it. Um, this is not changing her hair color. This is not whatever. It's this is making her become a permanent medical patient for the rest of her life. She's had so many issues even before this. uh, being a female and having some urinary issues, and just we've been we've run through the gamut on that stuff, and I don't see how this is going to help. I think it's going to hurt.
Well, and so many
um
detransitioned women who are coming out now are talking about how they already had this sort of host of mental health issues, and then they
mhm.
transitioned and they just added,
Yeah,
instead of like, getting better, they just added additional issues that now they have to deal with now that they realize that transitioning didn't solve all the problems that they thought it was going to. It's like it compounded their issues, and just
sure.
exacerbated. And so that's where I feel like, so many of these kids have a lot of underlying mental health issues. And to me, it's unconscionable that we're sort of glossing over those and allowing them to sort of run away from who they are. And
Yeah,
they're, instead of saying, okay, let's address all these underlying issues first, and then let's see where
right.
we are.
That is key. That is key, and that's the point that I was getting at too before, is that, we don't, societally, we don't grow up with learning that how we think and feel is an option. That feelings do not come from somebody else. Nobody can hurt us. Nobody can. It's our thought
It's our
about
thoughts.
something that hurts us,
And that's
and
where
that,
cognitive behavioral therapy is really helpful, because it
yes,
teaches you that you get to determine your thoughts. Your thoughts influence your feelings, and your feelings influence your behaviors. And we can change our thought process. I mean, that's something
yes,
that we have a lot of control over, and it's something that kids aren't taught now. That and I'm not sure if my generation even was taught that
no,
we get to control how we choose to think about things. And it's hard, but we can reprogram our thought processes
yes.
if we want to.
That's so true. I mean, that is the crux of life coaching, really, is knowing that, you have agency over your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, and your results. And when somebody tells you, "I don't like you," or "You're weird," or whatever, um, equating it to something like a peach, you know? Some people like peaches, some people don't, but it says nothing about the peach. It's just a peach. You don't have to take that on. If somebody were to tell me, "I hate your blue hair," I'd think, "You're nuts. I don't have blue hair." And we're not taught this. Our brains are the most powerful thing, the most powerful thing that we have. And it can serve us or it cannot serve us. And kids just aren't learning that.
In fact, it seems
Parents
like,
haven't learned it.
right,
Parents
parents
haven't
haven't
learned it
learned it. And
either.
it seems like our society is moving more towards this idea of disempowering kids, telling them
Yeah,
that you are a victim of your circumstance and there's really nothing you can do about it. And I definitely grew up with that message that I was a victim. That was something that was just hardwired into me as I was growing up. And it really was an epiphany when I realized that I could actually change my story, that I did not have to accept that
yeah.
narrative. And wow, how much healthier my thinking has gotten since I've made that realization. And that's what
Right.
therapists should be doing. But
They
instead, they're
should be.
telling kids that they're inherently flawed.
Yes. They're inherently flawed. Their brain is broken. This is why. And I don't validate you. I validate your history, your trauma. You are a victim, instead of saying, you are beating yourself up. You are hurting currently for something that happened to you in the past. And you can change that. Your habitual thought of going over that, "I'm bad, I'm this, I'm that super highway of wired thinking, as opposed to the work, like you say, the work in, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, we don't like it, but we can bushwhack through it and create, through practice, a different way of thinking. And it's huge. I've been transformed from it Parents can be transformed from it with it, and kids can too.
And
They're
it
just
really
not taught
is,
it.
that whole concept of the locus of control. If you feel like,
Yeah.
the external things and you're just sort of like the victim of circumstance, or if you have some control over yourself. And study after study has shown that when people feel like they have control over their lives, they do better. And there are, of course, there are always going to be circumstances. Your daughter has some, it sounds like, learning disabilities that probably are going to be there with her. But
Yeah,
but
sure.
framing that and saying, I have this issue, but boy, look at all this other stuff that's going on in my life. That can really make a powerful difference. And one of the
Yeah,
things that bothers me so much about the trans narrative is this: they just keep telling people that there's something wrong with them. And there's nothing they can do. It's not their fault. It's just this quirk of nature. But the fix is this drug. Now,
right,
I can't think of
right.
any other circumstance where people would be like, yeah, yeah, we should really affirm that. Because in most cases, we know that if somebody's running away from their circumstance and not taking responsibility for their lives, and they try to solve it with a drug, that's not going to be a really healthy solution. And yet, in this case, our society has embraced it.
That's so true that, we have this basic brain for survival and this motivational triad: avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, and being as efficient at it as possible. And that has kept us alive in times when we needed to be together, not alone dying on the savannah, or we're wired for danger. These kids are online and they see something and their brain tells them, this is interesting. This could be dangerous. I have to pay attention to this. And that piques their interest. And then they start, becoming vulnerable to that message. And then it's that urgency. It's not deciding from a place of clean decision making. It's from fear. It's better on the other side. It's all of that. And the thing is why are we taking these brains of these children, so to speak, and not matching the body to what the brain is thinking? I'm sorry, the other way around. Not matching the brain, I'm not saying that right.
No, I understand. It's so much easier to help a person to think differently about their body than it is to force
Yes,
the
then
body to
it
be
is to
something that it's not. And we see
exactly.
this in
Thank you.
case, yeah, we see this in cases all over the place. And I'm sure as a trainer that you saw this, that people can
Yep.
have very distorted images of themselves. And we don't validate that distorted image. It's helping a person to reconcile their image of themselves is just going to be healthier and easier than to try and force the body to be something that it's not. And it is a very confusing narrative. In any other case, I think specifically about anorexic, that if you have an
Yeah.
anorexic who has this distorted view of their body, you don't affirm that. You try to help her to see, or help him to see, that their ideas of themselves aren't quite accurate. And it kind of reminds me,
Yes.
I have a daughter, and she went through this funny phase when she was about 12 or 13, where she was buying clothes that were way too big for her, just way too big. And it was a very strange thing. Something in her brain, there was like this funky disconnect for a little bit, that she was thinking that she was much bigger than she really was. And it's something I didn't say, oh, of course you need these big clothes. I said, honey, can we talk?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we worked through it. And it was just one of those funny things. Teens do all kinds of funny things. And that's
Yeah.
part of being a teenager, is those kind of quirky, experimental, funny things that kids do. It's part of growing up. And it's our job as parents and as a society to help them to navigate what is reality and what maybe isn't.
Yeah, that's very true. Where they're changing their these kids are changing their bodies and their brain isn't changing. So their brain is here, and after they've made all these changes, their brain, their insecurities, all that stuff is
Still
still there.
there. It's
It's
still
all
there.
still there.
And you will
Yeah,
hear that over and over again, that
yeah,
if you go on trans sites and read posts from people who have transitioned, they still have huge angst. They still have
yeah,
all these mental health issues. And they try to explain it by saying it's because of transphobia, it's because of society. But it's because they keep trying to attain, they're running away, they keep trying to get to something that they're
right.
not going to get. And again, it's that lack of autonomy, that lack of self-control, that they believe that the reason that they are the way they are is because of something out there rather than what's going on in their head. So they're
True.
always blaming it
Yes.
on something else.
Yes. And it's such an oxymoron to think of them declaring themselves non-binary, that there's this, muddiness of male and female, and that they just, float between the two areas. But then a decision is made, and the decision is so counter what they've been saying that they're locking themselves into this very narrow view of what it means to be female, what it means to be male. And it makes no sense.
And
No
that's
sense.
so interesting that you say that, because I keep hearing that from people who say they're non-binary, but then they want to take cross-sex hormones. Now, if you're floating
Right.
somewhere in between, then why do you have to take cross-sex hormones? I
Yeah.
mean, it's like a very, well, it's because the whole narrative is very convoluted. It's
And
sort of
what
like,
happened to a tomboy? I mean,
yeah,
where are all the tomboys now? Well, you can't
right.
be a tomboy. You're either a boy or you're a girl.
Right. Well, and I was thinking today about, I've been thinking a lot about how insurance is paying for these surgeries, and
Mm,
how, a lot of us get attacked for, transgender people will often attack us for focusing on genitals. And yet it's the genitals that they want changed in order to show that they're the opposite sex. I mean, it's this weird narrative. But I think about how your insurance potentially could pay for your daughter to have her breasts amputated or to have a phalloplasty.
right.
And yet your insurance most likely wouldn't pay for her to have a breast augmentation because she wanted to feel more like a woman.
Right. Right.
So it's,
I, I I really hadn't considered that until I first heard you mention that in one of your previous interviews. And I think that's a very, very good point. Um, yeah, I mean, as far as my daughter goes, I know she had doubts about it. Because when I would bring her my doubts, she said, you don't know. You're just I've had all those thoughts already. Like I've already addressed those thoughts,
hmm,
those dangers and all of that. It's not like I haven't looked at that. And she did. She looked at freezing her eggs,
oh,
um, or preserving her eggs and finding out it was 12K and that, oh well, okay. But there's always something to justify um, these serious, serious
but that must be really
things.
scary to you if you know that she's already gone down that route thinking about it, because that means
Well,
she's,
she said that now this may have changed. She said she doesn't want bottom surgery and that, she would consider top surgery. I'm like, well, you don't have a top either. So do you have to, she's not this busty person by any means.
and a lot of men have
Um,
more breast tissue than I have. I mean,
I know.
I mean, that's the thing that's so frustrating, is that in all honesty, there probably, I would say 70% of men have more breast tissue than I have. So does that
Yeah,
mean they're more women than I am? I mean, this whole, it's defining people based upon these very strange criteria, when the criteria that we have for defining male and female is very concrete: chromosomes,
yes,
you know?
yes.
So,
Yes, and it's we're kind of back in the dark ages as far as like come on, some of this stuff has been made palatable. Whether it's, transsexualism is now transgenderism. And gender came out of it's a social construct that came out of language. It has had nothing to do with sex, and we are talking about genitals here. And what the hell is wrong with talking about genitals? I mean, uh, it's crazy. It's
Yeah,
just
it just
it's crazy thinking, and how that is a good or bad thing. It's this is what we're talking about.
and we're talking about
Okay,
mutilating people's genitals, which to me is just
sure, sure.
how is this a social justice agenda when we're mutilating people's
Yeah,
genitals? I mean,
yeah. How
gosh.
is talking about genitals any worse than mutilating them? Okay, or the concept of mutilating them.
Oh my gosh. So, Lisa, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Uh, the only thing I would say is um, to parents, to moms, um, you haven't done anything wrong,
Yeah.
and um, we all have good hearts. We all care about our kids, and um, you can go back and beat yourself up, or I teach accepting the reality of it. That doesn't mean I condone it, but I don't suffer because of it, of what's happening.
And
But I can
again, that's part of
also
that
have,
thought process that it's so
yeah,
easy as a mom to beat yourself
yeah,
up because as a
yeah,
society, we really encourage that. But
oh yeah,
it's not going to really help the situation. And in reality, it's not the moms and the dads that are doing this. It's this weird social contagion out there.
oh no, I've been accused of being my daughter has a lot of resentment and blame for whatever perceived whatever she's had, and I think she has therapists saying that I'm toxic, that it's a toxic relationship, and that's never been the case.
And
And
it's
I
also
guess
incredibly unhealthy. What does that even mean?
it's so,
I
like,
mean,
how
what
is
does
that
that
even
even mean?
serving the relationship?
Yeah.
How is that even serving, I coach on connection, and it's it's not bringing people together. It's tearing them apart. And it's the same thing for girls, young girls. It's just like, question everything, question yourself. And it's okay. You're not your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. We have 60,000 thoughts a day, and they're just sentences in our head.
And a lot of
And
them
we
just come
can,
from outside
yeah,
sources
yeah,
that are not in
yeah,
they're not for our benefit. It's
yeah. And hang on to those that serve you and those that don't.
and the other
Yeah,
thing that I think is so important and I remember being that age and I remember the heaviness of that
yeah,
age.
yeah,
And I remember feeling like this was kind of it. I'm stuck in this. This is
yeah,
crappy. I don't like it.
yeah,
And I think that if kids can just get through, I always shoot for 32 as sort of my when I feel
yeah.
like
I like that.
I
That's
started to
good. Yeah.
figure it out. Like and there was a sudden shift where all of a sudden it was like perspective there was a perspective. And I also had some learning issues, so it could have been that
Hmm.
it came a little bit late for me. But even, there
Yeah.
were even some simple concepts that I had really struggled with as a kid that sort of like suddenly made sense when I, was about 32. It was like, oh,
And it
this is
comes
what they
from,
mean when they say it'll get better. Oh,
yeah, but they don't, again, it's a matter of cognitive, maturation. It
and
it really is.
that's where if they can just
And
wait, if they can just
yes,
wait.
yes. And what's wrong with waiting? But you're dealing with adolescents that they don't like to wait. But as I told my daughter, even as an adult, I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. I wasn't, and certainly not when I was in high school. I hope not. I hope I'm growing and evolving, and that's the point of becoming an emotional adult and taking responsibility for how you feel, and that your perspective is your perspective. And yeah,
Well, I would love to follow up with you maybe in a year and see
oh, that'd be
where
great.
things
Yeah,
are going because I'd be really
yeah.
curious. The one question I have is, how do you think that she'll respond to this video if she sees it?
Um, um, I don't know. I mean, she knows I love her, But she has said to me, but that's not enough. Love is, it's no excuse for whatever I've done to her. And That's just her perspective. It's just her perspective. It
I know when I
Love
spoke
is
with,
everything. It
yeah, and I
is.
know
It's
when I speak with
everything.
Lynn Meager, I'm not sure if you've seen her video, but she has,
I don't
had,
know.
she's a mom, and her experience has been similar to you, in that, but more so, she doesn't have any contact, but
Yeah.
she really feels like maybe doing a video like this will reach her kid to hear, to hear a mom say, "I love you,"
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
for a kid to hear that, there are a lot of kids who don't ever hear that from their parents. They don't
Yeah.
ever
Oh
hear
no.
that
Yeah.
from their parents.
She's heard that all the
And
time. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
just that, kind of that reality of these are kids who have very loving and concerned parents.
Yeah.
They're not kids who have been neglected their whole lives. And part of that is just, to me, the most heartbreaking thing is that you did, it's like you're expected to do more than love. You're supposed to love, plus you're supposed to affirm something you don't agree with. And
I couldn't do that.
that's
That's
antithetical to parenting. That is completely the
yeah.
opposite of what you're supposed to do as a parent. You're
Yeah.
supposed to love your kid, and you're supposed to tell them when you think they're making mistakes. You're supposed to set those boundaries. That's what a good parent does.
And I tried everything. I tried everything. I tried going along with it for a little bit, thinking it was a phase, that it would, and not too much intention to it. And it just got to the point. It. I told her my truth, and she had a hard time with that. And I said, "Honey, I love you, and not all parents like the decisions that their kids have made. That doesn't mean that you know, that I'm invalidating you or, I respect it's your choice. It absolutely is your choice. I don't agree with it, and I'm worried about your health, and that's why.